Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Midnight Sports Talk, this talk show and podcast of Midnight Sports Today. My name is Brock, and we are joined with a very special guest. He is the COO of Consensus Sports Media. He is also a senior writer for Nuts and Bolts Sports, and he is a college football and NFL vlogger for Zini 62 Media. We are very happy to have Bill Carroll on the show. Welcome, Bill.
Well, the pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much for being here. So let's just jump right into it. So, Mr. Carroll, what have you been up to?
A lot. This is a very busy time of year. So between doing co-hosting with my friend Jeff Barnes, Nuts and Bolts Draft Central, so NBS Draft Central for Nuts and Bolts Sports, writing about the draft, writing about Black football history, just concluded, obviously, into February, my tweet series I've been doing for the past several years, which is Black football history and hashtag Black Football History Month. So if you click on hashtag Black Football History or hashtag Black Football History Month, you'll see several years worth of postings I've done about Lowell Perry, Fritz Pollard, John Ink Mayo, Sadat Singh, and hundreds of other pioneers in Black football history. Additionally, this is a very big time of year for pro day reports. So interviewing players, getting pro day information. I was attending, most recently, the last All-Star game I attended was the inaugural HBCU Legacy Bowl. And of course, Pat Mahomes is a big supporter of it. He's put his weight behind it, which has really helped that jumpstart the HBCU Legacy Bowl. Shaq Harris, and of course, the first Black quarterback to win a Super Bowl, Doug Williams, also are part of the driving force behind that. Teron Armstead and I got a chance to talk a little bit. I talked to Bucky Brooks down there and several others. So that's part of what I've been up to. And then last but not least, what's going on with free agency and trying to keep track of that. So I'll be doing some, what I call franchise fixer-upper videos on Zini 62 Sports Media about how some teams can plug holes that were maybe made in free agency, either later in free agency or obviously with the draft that's coming up soon. And the last thing I'll mention, didn't know it was going to go on this long, but sorry. But here it is. The weekend before the draft, so that's the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the weekend prior to the NFL draft, we will have the 7th annual Mock Draft Palooza, where 16 GMs, each being a GM for one AFC and one NFC team, will go through 7 rounds of mock drafting, 262 picks this year. So it separates the men with small bladders from the men with large bladders, is what that does. So that's what I'll be doing on the weekend prior to the draft.
Wow, you have a very full plate, and we will be discussing some of those things, talking about the NFL, the free agency, and the draft, along with your work with HBCUs and HBCU programs in general. I do want to go a little bit back. Let's talk about the history a little bit. Obviously, when it comes to sports in America, there are the great African-American pioneers. Of course, you have Jackie Robinson with baseball, various basketballs such as Bill Russell with the Celtics, or if you want to go to college, I believe it's Texas Western beating Kentucky back in the day with the all-white Kentucky basketball team led by Pat Riley. Apologies.
Well, I mean, Pat Riley was a player. Adolph Rupp was the coach.
Right. I'm sorry, Pat Riley, I believe he was a shooting guard for that team. Adolph Rupp was the
small
coach.
Forward. Yeah, swing man. He was 6'3", so he played a little bit of guard and forward.
Exactly. Well, you definitely have your eye on great sports, and more importantly, Coach Rupp was very against integration when it came to his basketball teams. Only when he got beaten by a team of all African Americans did he finally see the benefit of having, a fair playing field for all. Let's just say maybe his morals.
His hand was forced. I think it's hard to put it.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. But let's talk about football in general. Why haven't the early pioneers have such a high acclaim as, let's say, other sports?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. And I'm going to start with William Henry Lewis. William Henry Lewis is one of those people who should be discussed more in American history for a bunch of reasons. He was, at one point, the highest ranking Black federal employee in the country during the Theodore Roosevelt administration. Theodore Roosevelt was an interesting man. He very much believed in athletics and that it could build character and things like that. So part of what attracted him to bringing William Henry Lewis, who at one point was an assistant solicitor general for the United States, one of the highest ranking attorneys in the country, in the federal government, was his football exploits. He was the first Black All-American football player, and back in the old Walter Camp football Americans. He also wrote one of the first books about American football. William Henry Lewis was an amazing man, a true pioneer, and there should be things named for him. There should be a William Henry Lewis scholarship. He was the first Black college coach. I mean, he did a bunch of things, and he's not very well known. That's what I've discovered. When I bring his name up to people, I get a lot of, but yes, William Henry Lewis should be well known. He should be as well known as people like Amos Alonzo Stagg and Pop Warner and some of these people who helped to make American football, because he was an innovator, and he was a great center, and he was a small guy, small by American football standards of today, but he's extremely quick and extremely smart. And even for his era, he was a bit undersized, but he was incredibly smart, extremely tough. And so a lot of the blocking as we know it now has evolved a lot. And I don't want to go too deep down into this rabbit hole, because I will if you let me, but here's what I want you to know. So much of the modern footwork and handwork that centers and guards do now can be traced literally back to this man. Once again, no one knows his name, but William Henry Lewis was a tremendous innovator. He was a brilliant individual, a very good trial lawyer who eventually, like I said, became the highest ranking Black federal employee in the prior really to the turn of the century, prior to 1900. Or not prior to, sorry, a little after 1900. So prior to World War II, I think he was the highest ranking. And then FDR's administration finally sort of broke through that level. We got some people at the cabinet level finally entering who are Black. But he was one of those people who set a bunch of standards. And like I said, he should be more well known. I'll throw names out there too as well. When we think about much more recently, people who helped to innovate on the offensive side as football shifted from to use a military term, from a war of position to a war of maneuver, right? So shout out to all my former ROTC cadets out there. And to simplify what that means, you're simply in a war of position, you're trying to get the most advantageous spot on the battlefield, right? The high ground or whatever it is, and use that advantage to impose that advantage and press that advantage on your opponent until you win. But the war of maneuver cares a little bit less about that. The high ground's great and everything, but what if I can surround you or not be where you expect me to be and suddenly be behind you when you thought I was in front of you, things like that, right? That's what the passing game really is in American tackle football. It is that war of maneuver. It's suddenly being here, boop, now we're there, right? The game for a very long time, if you study the history of the game, was really just about force against force, right? The flying wedge and those early single wing formations and things like Gil Dobie's football teams and things like that. But when the passing game really began to truly extend out and change the way the game looks, one of the great innovators was Archie the Gunslinger Cooley at Mississippi Valley State. And Jerry Rice never becomes Jerry Rice without Archie the Gunslinger Cooley. It wasn't like the football world was beating down the doors for Jerry Rice. He was a guy who probably would be about a 2 or 3 star prospect coming out of high school. And at the time, most predominantly white institutions were very selective, I'll put it that way, in bringing, especially in the South, in bringing in Black players. They had to be the creme de la creme, right? They weren't just bringing in guys who were okay or good. You had to be the greatest, the best of the best. And his high school tape was good, but it was, not a very wide receiver friendly offense, and it was a smaller school and things like that. So he ends up in Itty Bitty, Mississippi, which people jokingly call Itty Bitty, Mississippi. If you've been there, you understand why. And luckily for him, Willie Totten had also decided to go there. And Willie Totten was a tremendous passing quarterback. And unfortunately, he was a Black quarterback a little too early. He never really got a fair shot in the NFL, spent a few years in Canada, then went into coaching. I think at the very least, he at least knocks around the NFL for 5 or 6 years as a backup if he comes out, nowadays. And Willie Totten was an extremely smart guy, had an average arm, quite frankly, but great feet, very smart, got the ball out, and very accurate. So the offense that Willie Totten played in was designed, as I mentioned before, by the gunslinger, Archie Cooley. And Archie Cooley looked at his team and said, we're not going to just run the ball down people's throats. One, because we can't, right? He just looked at his team and said, we're not good enough at certain positions just to ram the ball down your throat. And like so many great innovators on offense, he had originally started on defense, right? So many of the guys, Clark Shaughnessy and loads of others who innovated offense in this game were originally either defensive players or defensive coaches, and then thought about what offense would I not want to face? And that's essentially what he designed. He looked even all the way back to like Newt Rockney's Notre Dame box and things like that, and put the quad box out there. So it's 4 wide receivers in literally a box on one side and Jerry Rice on the other. And he said, you can double cover Jerry Rice if you want, but that means at least one of these guys in my quad box is going to be running naked down the field. Choose your destroyer, right? And by doing that, he made it so that you couldn't take Jerry Rice away. Jerry Rice broke every record there was for receiving at the time, at least. At any level of football you want to name, quite frankly, now since those records mostly, not all, but many of them have been broken. But in that era of football, what he was doing was unprecedented. And people don't talk enough about Archie Gunslinger Cooley as an offensive designer, a play designer, and innovator. And I'll give you one more, and then we'll move on, because once again, I have a tendency to go long, so I apologize. In this game, as it has been developed, Jake the Snake Gaither, legendary coach at Florida A&M, to explain what kind of coach he was, Paul Bear Bryant used to go to his clinics, not the other way around. Okay? Jake Gaither wasn't going to Paul Bear Bryant's clinics. Paul Bear Bryant was going to Jake Gaither's clinics. Now, do you know what I'm talking about? So when he wanted to change from running the wishbone option to running wing T, who did he learn it from? Jake the Snake Gaither at Florida A&M. Amongst some of the great players that he had included Bullet Bob Hayes, Hall of Famer, and someone who should be in the Hall of Fame, and it's a crying shame that he isn't, is his former quarterback, Kenny Riley. And Kenny Riley shows up in the camp of the Bengals, never having played cornerback one moment in his football playing career, not in high school, not in youth league, Pop Warner, not in college. He's been a quarterback since he was about 9 or 10 years old. Shows up in the Bengals camp. Immediately they tell him, well, once again, he's black. Hey, go over there with the cornerbacks. To his credit, he not only does it, but ends up with 65 career interceptions, and in my mind should be in the Hall of Fame. And I don't understand why he is, quite frankly, in the Hall of Fame. But Jake Gaither gave him the mindset, right, to be able to suddenly be thrown this ridiculous challenge of, at the NFL level, playing a position you never played for a single second of your football playing career, and be able to do it so well you should be in the Hall of Fame. That doesn't happen without Jake the Snake Gaither at Florida A&M, who prepared all of his players. One of his famous quotes when he was talking about when he was born a player, I want him to be mobile, hostile, agile, and not too fragile. That was one of his great quotes. He was a very, very, very quotable individual. He would be big on social media nowadays if he had been around now. So I'll give you those 3 guys to work on, and there's a bunch of others. So if you click on my Black Football History hashtags and Black Football History Month hashtags, you see a bunch more.
Wow, that was an education, to say the least. Let's transition from the past into the 70s and 80s era of African-American football players and also coaches. Obviously, as you previously mentioned, Black quarterbacks were not given the opportunities that they were at the NFL level. And even till today, there is still that type of rhetoric when it comes to the dual threat African-American quarterback, most notably Lamar Jackson. Let's talk about what made the shakeup. Obviously, Doug Williams was the first ever a first-round pick, but before him, Warren Moon was lighting it up at Washington. And what allowed them to finally break into the NFL and get their fair
opportunity? Well, first, Warren Moon wasn't given that chance, right? Teams were asking him to run routes or to go play safety, right? So he ends up going undrafted because teams didn't look at him as a quarterback. Goes up to Canada, wins 5 Grey Cups in 5 years in Canada. You can't win more than 5 in 5 years. Like, that's as many as you could win, right? Such records, some of his records haven't even been broken yet. A few have been, but some of his records he set in those 5 years still haven't been broken. Comes down, and once again, luckily is put in an offense that lets him show everything he can do. So in that essentially run and shoot, based on that Mouse Davis offense. Well, it's Tiger Ellison's offense, but the Mouse Davis version of it. And he kills it, basically. He's essentially Black Dan Marino, for lack of a better way of putting it. And unfortunately, like Dan Marino, he doesn't have a Super Bowl ring, but he changed the way people looked at Black quarterbacks, or helped to do it. And then Doug Williams was a guy that went literally to the worst possible situation in football, right? He gets drafted by Tampa Bay when Tampa Bay was the worst team in the history of the game, right? I mean, they've never been a team quite so bad as the first few years of Tampa Bay. Hugh Culverhouse, and I don't know how far you want to go down this hole, but was not a good owner, not a good person. and did not set Doug up for success. And then you add to it, he got some of the most ugly racial animus. Watermelons thrown on his porch, death threats. I mean, name something, right? He went through a horrific experience. He doesn't talk about it that much, but if you talk to him, he'll open up after a while, and made it clear that it's hard enough to play quarterback in the NFL on a team that's not good, right? I mean, that's one of the most difficult things you can imagine in sports, is being a quarterback of a bad team. Add to it that when you go to the store, people are looking at you and, you know, doing this, right? And like I said, the stuff that people, nooses in the trees around here, I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Things that most people luckily won't even have to imagine. And so, unsurprisingly, he did not have a great career in Tampa Bay, right? Ends up in the USFL, has a good couple of seasons there. The USFL goes away. Joe Gibbs has always liked him. Joe Gibbs had been an assistant in San Diego. They were set at quarterback, all right? They had Dan Fouts at the time. So they were set at quarterback when Doug was coming out, but he'd scouted him, he'd liked him, always kept it sort of filed away in the back of his mind. And so when Doug became available, he brought him in, but not to play. I mean, he was gonna be a backup. You know, they once again thought they were set at quarterback. Turns out they weren't quite so set at quarterback as they thought. A combination of ineffectiveness and injury from the other two guys that they had pushed Doug eventually up into a role he starts playing. And he went on a great run throughout the last part of that season and into the postseason, and of course becomes a Super Bowl MVP in a game that they just destroyed Elway's, you know, Denver Broncos, who got off to a 10-point start and then scored 46 unanswered points. You know, and you know, my father, who had grown up in Virginia in the 40s and 50s, actually did not root for that team because of their owner, George Preston Marshall, who was a virulent racist and was the last team, the Washington, as my father used to call them, the Whiteskins, was the last team to integrate. Yeah, well, it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of sad. And they were forced to do it in 1963 because, frankly, the NFL said you're not going to get these rights, these opportunities, this money, these other things, you know, and all these other things that you need to function as a franchise if you keep running out this all-white team. And so the deal was made to bring Bobby Mitchell, who, once again, should be talked about more for what an incredibly courageous individual he was, comes and plays for, of all people, George Preston Marshall, who, I mean, Brock, you do a whole other show on like the worst things that people have had to deal with in football history. We'll cover you, Culver House, we'll cover George Preston Marshall. But he goes there, puts his head down, plays well, integrates the last bastion of pure racism, in terms of uncut, unstepped on racism in the NFL. There's still, pockets of it left, but he helped to change the way that the league works as well. And then it was really the success of a couple of quarterbacks that came after that. Warren Moon certainly helped, but when you look at the success that came after, when you look at what Russell Wilson did, right? Russell Wilson helped to break two barriers. One, he's 5'10" and 5'8", and he's black, right? So he's a mobile black quarterback who's short. That used to be automatic. You're playing in other positions. Like, hello, Brian Mitchell, go play running back. I mean, Brian Mitchell was a terrific quarterback in college. Southwest Louisiana State, he was the first player in any level of football to pass for 2,500 and rush for 1,000 yards in a season. People did it after him, but no one did it before him. But no team even thought about playing him at quarterback. He was black and short, right? You could be one or the other. You can't be both. And finally, Russell Wilson changed that. And then that opened the door for Kyler Murray. And so now guys like Malik Willis will get their chance to play quarterback. Even guys like Caleb Ellaby will get a chance to play quarterback. There's other guys who, some of them might not make it, but at least they'll get their chance, right? Whether they make it or not, the door won't be closed, And so it took James Shaq Harris, who I got a chance to not so much meet because he was busy, but stand close to. And I've talked to Doug Williams before. He was, once again, too busy at Legacy Bowl to really talk, but I've talked to him before. And guys like that basically ran into a brick wall, right? When I think about what Marlon Briscoe had to go through, right? Despite being a very effective quarterback, was moved to wide receiver. Once again, also short and very athletic. Later won a Super Bowl ring at playing wide receiver, playing what we would now call slot receiver with the Miami Dolphins later. But he was a guy that I think if he comes along nowadays, he gets fairly evaluated as a quarterback, gets this decent shot. Those guys, God bless them. And even guys before that, Willie Thrower and, George Taliaferro. I mean, those guys were not ever really, really given a chance. They tried, they did the best they could. But there wasn't, the first time somebody really sort of invested was Eldridge Dickey, right? The Lord's Prayer, right, as his nickname was. So he comes from Tennessee State. The Raiders draft him, and they're not very patient, unfortunately. They thought he was going to come in and be ready to go right away. He wasn't. And then eventually they pushed him out to wide receiver. He wasn't a wide receiver, and it's a failed experiment. So you really have a lot of hurdles that you have to overcome if you're going to try. I mean, the 50s and 60s, you can pretty much forget it for the most part. By the time you get to the 70s, you can mostly forget it. But if you're really great and you're really mentally strong, you might be able to persevere. James Shaq Harris, right, becomes a Pro Bowl MVP and a Pro Bowler, right? Even then, they were constantly looking to replace him, right? He outplays Dennis Shaw. Well, that's not good enough. We got to try to bring someone else to, and then we got to trade you, So, and they were constantly looking to replace him. Like, no matter what he did, they were always looking to replace Shaq. So James Harris is a guy that had to go through the ringer as well. But all those guys did that so that guys like Kyler Murray, guys like Deshaun Jackson, guys like Malik Willis, guys like Russell, and these other guys who are finally getting a real chance. Thank God, maybe Tyrod Taylor gets a real chance this year. Because talk about snake bit, that poor guy, my gosh. But yes, the playing field is not completely level, but it's no longer filled with minefields, Brock.
Yeah, and I do want to just kind of add to your point earlier about Doug Williams. Obviously, we will talk about it another time, but we both know how horrible of an owner Hugh Culverhouse was. Yes. The only good thing I can think that he did was hiring John McKay as head coach. But Doug Williams did take that horrific Tampa Bay team to the NFC Championship game.
Yes.
Considering how bad of a roster he was.
Yes.
And, I'm sure it was a shock. Oh, sorry, continue.
Yes. I mean, that should be talked about more. I mean, in a 3-year period, they went from a team that was historically terrible. Like, we'll never see a team that bad again. Like, they've changed the way expansion, even if we have an expansion team come into the league, they've changed the rules. In the old days, you just got literally like flotsam, jetsam, refuse, detritus, right? You couldn't get decent players. The only teams you got were teams that other teams were like, okay, you're hurt, you're old, you're just bad, right? And so they would leave those guys unprotected in the expansion draft. And that was what you got. You got, the island of misfit toys. So, I mean, you had J.K. McKay, right? The son of the coach, who originally was going to be a guy working for the team, ended up having to play wide receiver because he looked at how bad his receivers were. And he was like, okay, son, I have some news for you. Your playing career isn't over. And J.K. McKay himself will tell you, I was not an NFL player. The fact that I was out there playing lets you know just how bad things were. So yes. It's not talked about enough what John McKay and Doug Williams and some of those other players on that team did to go from being this team that was, if not the worst, certainly in the very short list of the worst teams in the history of football, to that quickly be able to contend is really, like I said, it's not talked about enough as what an accomplishment it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that first season, the Tampa Bay was Leroy Selman and 52 other guys, it seemed like. But moving on a little bit further, wow, Washington has not had a fun time with his owners. Obviously, George Preston Marshall, Jack Kent Cook, and Daniel Snyder has wow,
Jack against the winner. If you're just going by their ownership, the clear winner is Jack Kent Cook, right? I mean, that's really tells you everything you need to know, is that he's the winner, and it's not even close of that little list there. Our nation's capital has had some weird adventures in ownership. Yes, I'll say that, bud. And the current owner in this very interesting environment where we see NFL football now having to adjust to dealing with actual real life issues that affect people's lives. And to see this person who has essentially sort of hidden themselves away in this magic castle of money, where they don't have to be affected by what happens to other people and don't seem to care. I can only hope that something changes. And I know that Jason Wright is a person that wants to do the right thing and wants to change the way that team works and the way that team is seen. And I know that Ron Rivera is a man of high personal character. So I can hope, I'm hoping against hope, Brock. I'm hoping, it's one of those things where it's like, it's a minor miracle, but I'm hoping they can somehow turn and change that team's, frankly, rather toxic and somewhat broken culture.
Absolutely. I do want to talk about Doug Williams just a little bit further, and we will get into Washington a little bit later. I wasn't around when this happened, but what was it like in America to see Doug Williams not only become the first Black quarterback to win a Super Bowl, but he beat the All-American boy in John Elway, the football star from Stanford, the base guy who could have played baseball, right? Denver Bronco, mobile, big arm. What was that like?
Right. So John Albert Elway Jr. was like a creative player, right? He was 6'3", 225, could run, could throw a football through a car wash without it getting wet. I mean, he was perfect. He was essentially the perfect quarterback. High football IQ, was basically a co-offensive coordinator by the time he was in high school. I'm not even joking. He and his head coach in high school drew up what we later called the one-back offense together. I'm not joking. Look it up. They developed this offense together. So by the time he's a senior in high school, he's the son of a coach, so he has a bit of a running start. But he's running things at the line the way you'd see an NFL quarterback doing. He's changing protections. He's changing the hots. He's adjusting the whether you think it's man versus zone. He's identifying the mic. I mean, he's off the charts developed for a guy who's 17, 18 years old. Goes to Stanford, which was already kind of a quarterback factory. And then he really cements its legacy as a quarterback factory because, it already had Plunkett, it already had Guy Benjamin and Frankie Albert. They'd done it pretty well at the quarterback position already. And now you have basically a god in flesh at the quarterback position. And quarterback scouts were salivating about him by 6 games into his first season. It's like, oh, right? I mean, getting all hot under the collar about this guy. Because, I mean, he's perfect. He's literally the perfect quarterback. And Stanford wasn't good. That's the other thing. Like, to see what he was doing with not exactly the world's best talent, going 5-6, 6-5, 7-4, basically, right? In his career there, mostly. Garen Veras was a decent player. Got Glenn Milburn. You don't need to hear their starting lineup, but they had a handful of good players, but mostly it was a bunch of guys who were future, like hedge fund guys. I mean, like, it's a Stanford, right? These are guys who they might be playing football, but they're going to Stanford to get a Stanford education, right? And so when he comes out, I mean, every team in America would love to get him, but of course his draft rights are owned by the Colts. Well, he doesn't want to go to play with the Colts, right? So he leverages his opportunity. He had a $400-something thousand signing bonus, if memory serves me correctly, to come play with the Yankees. George Steinbrenner's never been afraid of throwing money around, and he loves the idea of getting the best football player in America to play for the Yankees. Just think of the publicity, right? George Steinbrenner never met a headline he didn't like, even the negative headlines. He doesn't care. It's a headline, right? He's one of those all publicity is good publicity kind of people. So Steinbrenner's like, yeah, sure, I'll back you in this. He knows it's unlikely Elway's going to play baseball, but when he says, I mean, he doesn't say to him, hey, let me use you to move move myself out of Indianapolis. Actually, were they still in? No, I think they were still in Baltimore.
Yeah, I know when he was drafted, they were still in Baltimore.
We was drafted in '83 in that great '83 draft. But I think they moved shortly there. But it doesn't matter so much. But here's the point: he didn't want to play for them. That's what really matters. And he had, unlike most people, he had the leverage because most guys, you go where you're drafted. You don't like it, don't play. He has this option. So Steinbrenner's, letting it be known that he's thrilled to get John Elway and can't wait to have him in Yankee pinstripes. There's even a cover of, I think it was Sporting News, where he's got his arm around Elway, and Elway's in pinstripes, right? He's got a football under one arm and a bat over his shoulder, right? Take that, Bo Jackson. You're not the first one. So he's in this situation where he can actually force his way, from one situation to another situation. He forces his way to Denver, right? Forces that deal that sends him to Denver. Chris Hinton, right, is a big part of the deal that goes there. You don't need to know about who was in the deal or the picks. No one cares. Okay, so he goes to Denver, immediately makes that team a contender, takes them to Super Bowl a couple of years later, the drive, right? And, sorry, Cleveland Browns fans, all that good stuff. but he still comes up short in the Super Bowls, right? And of course, this is another example of that. So Doug Williams, who wasn't even supposed to be a starter, as I mentioned before, comes in, and ineffectiveness and injury to two other guys ahead of him on the depth chart, push him up, and finally he becomes a starter. And, he has one or two games that weren't great, but mostly he plays extremely well, takes the team through the playoffs and into the Super Bowl. And there's all this pressure on him, right? Because everybody, they had people who don't even normally cover sports, right, interviewing him about this because it's this historic event. And one of the questions, believe it or not, was, how long have you been a Black quarterback, right? I'm not joking. Look it up. Somebody asked him that at one of the Super Bowl press, conferences. So he's answering all kinds of questions, some of them that make sense, some of them that frankly don't. But he handles all of that, with incredible dignity and poise. He handles the pressure, all of this pressure. And, obviously Elway is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the history of the game. He's right there with Mahomes, and that might be there's not many people who could do what those guys can do, right? Josh Allen might push his way onto that list as well, but it's a short list, right? Guys who have that kind of talent. Maybe even Greg Cook, who unfortunately had his career destroyed by the same injury that almost destroyed Drew Brees' career, but he didn't have the medical technology, unfortunately, to save his career. But that's a short list of guys who have that kind of talent, to be able to move like that, think like that, to understand the game at that level and throw the ball like that. That's 3-4 guys in 100 years. Okay. So, especially when they go down 10 points, and then Doug Williams gets a hyperextended knee, right? Goes down, limps off the field. It looks like his day might be done. Nope. He realizes, I will probably never get this opportunity again. Tapes it up, a couple of aspirin and maybe a little something extra, goes back out on that field, plays lights out football. And so it literally changed not just football, but it helped to change our country, right? Helped to change perceptions of people that they might have had. So it's very important. And John Elway, to his credit, kept playing, and he officially won 2 Super Bowls. But, he was a guy that should have been, could have been, right? And maybe should be talked about as among the greatest, in terms of just pure talent, one of the greatest we've ever seen. I guess Aaron Rodgers would be somewhere in that list too, but that's a short list. 4 or 5 guys who have that level of talent. He was one of them. And Doug Williams overcame that with the help of a really good team around him. Like that, well, not there by himself. That was a really good team. He was, Art Monk, and Gary Clark, and Riggins, and the team was really good, very good team. But of course, speaking of things that have never been done before or since, Joe Gibbs, who doesn't get mentioned enough amongst the greatest coaches of all time, 3 different quarterbacks, right? Who can say that they've gone to the Super Bowl and won them with 3 different quarterbacks, and none of them are Hall of Famers. Mark Rippon was a solid but not exactly spectacular quarterback. Theismann's probably the one with the best case for the Hall of Fame, but he's not a Hall of Famer. And Doug Williams, was a guy that had a very short window of great effectiveness in his career, but was a guy that had sort of been cast aside and almost seen as a bust earlier in his career, and then has this great sort of career rejuvenation very late in his career. But hats off to Joe Gibbs doing that with 3 guys that, like I said, are not going to even sniff the Hall.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even when he came back, he was still able to take a pretty poor Washington team to the playoffs on, I believe, 2 or 3 occasions. I do want to talk about, so one of the criticisms about Black quarterbacks in the history of football in general is the fact that they cannot process passing routes, reads, the game in general in lightning fashion. You see a guy like Doug Williams, and Joe Gibbs, who was a student of Don Coryell, I believe.
Yes, he comes off the Coryell tree. Correct.
So Aaron Coryell, right? Then we see Steve McNair excel in Houston and Tennessee, right? And he has a co-MVP with Peyton Manning and so on and so forth. Yep. However, a lot of those guys started at HBCUs. In fact, a lot of great championship teams in the NFL had a bunch of players from HBCUs. Yep. Just some on top of my head, Stallworth for the Steelers. He came from HBCU. Yep. Gene Upshaw and Art Shell, they were from historically black colleges, I believe, for the Raiders. Walter Payton, so on and so forth. Yep.
Right, however, Jerry Rice.
Right, Jerry Rice is another one. The list can go on and on and on.
Yes, the long list, yes.
However, in the modern game, we've seen a lot of those players that haven't had those opportunities before start and excel at big-time programs. where do you see HBCU players fitting in the modern NFL, and how are players from HBCUs able to get those opportunities?
Sure. And the HBCU Legacy Bowl and the associated combine, I think, will help. The problem has become, and once again, this is something that may or may not have crossed your radar, but about 6 years ago, don't quote me on the exact number of years, but I think it's about right. There was a year where a couple of NFL scouts, only a couple showed up to Jackson State's pro day, and they left after one event, the 40. And it was because no one broke 4.6. Now, if you're a defensive tackle, what are the chances you're going to run less than 4, or guard, or really most positions, you run less than 4.6? So they left. They packed up and left because no one ran under 4.6. And the disrespect of that is mind-boggling. It never would have happened in the past. So for a while there, we had, in my mind, a real retrograde, moving in the wrong direction in terms of seeing and acknowledging the talent at the HBCU level. And I think one of the things that will help, this draft year, there were no HBCU players drafted last year. I think there will be at least a couple, maybe as many as 3 drafted this year. And I think that will help. I think that the commitment that the Senior Bowl and of course the Black College Hall of Fame and others have made to increasing the amount of attention being paid, I think that will help. But the main thing that will help is scouts getting their behinds to see more HBCU games, going to more practices, and going to things like the HBCU Legacy Bowl, and going to pro days that are being held for HBCUs. If that starts to happen, more combines, more pro days, more practices, that's what'll fix it, and this, obviously, the success of guys like Darius Leonard, he's one of the 3 or 4 best linebackers in football. I tried telling everyone who would listen to this when he was at South Carolina State, what an amazing player he was. There's guys coming out this year who I think have a chance, maybe not to the Darius Leonard level, but have a chance to be very successful pros. And that's the thing. You keep your job as a scout when you find good players. You lose your job as a scout when you don't. So if scouts realize that there's good players to be found at HBCUs, and they find them and their bosses say, good job, and you get promoted as opposed to getting fired, that will fix it, right? Self-interest, what Thomas Jefferson, I think, described as enlightened self-interest, will be the thing that I think turns this boat around. It gets us back in the direction of HBCU talent getting a better shot in the NFL.
Yeah, and let's talk, and I want to transition to the modern landscape of HBCUs. Obviously, Deion Sanders, becoming the head coach of Jackson State, has turned HBCUs on top of his head, right? Commitments for some of the best players in the country to Jackson State, along with NIL and such programs like that factoring in.
The Travis Hunter signing broke the internet, to say, set Twitter ablaze, yes.
And, this has nothing to do with our interview. I just want to add this possibly from my own ego. I said Deion Sanders should have been hired at Florida State over Norvell, but let's, I'm not an AD for.
Well, guess what, man? Take your victory lap, baby. Go ahead. And guess what? He may get that job someday, but he's staying for a couple more years. He wants to really build something that will sustain for a while there. Yes. See what happens with Eddie George. We'll see what happens with Hugh Jackson. But yes, we're seeing a level of attention being paid again to HBCUs that we haven't seen in a while. And I hope that this is, a permanent state of affairs, not a temporary state of affairs.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe maybe 6-7 years ago, I remember seeing an article that Grambling University, its facilities were in a state of disrepair. There was leaking, water was everywhere, and
black mold. Yes,
yeah, it was horrific.
Yes, it was awful. The guys were getting staph infections from, the lack of sanitation. Yes, it was bad. It was really, really bad. Now, once again, you don't have time for this on your show, or at least not this particular show probably, but there has been a historical imbalance in the ways that HBCUs are funded by the states in which they are located. So they get, unfortunately, a smaller portion based on their enrollment than white schools, predominantly white schools that are in their states. This has gone on forever. This is not news. This has gone on since, well, in some cases, the 1800s, in terms of the age of the school, but it's gone on forever. And it would take hundreds of millions of dollars to catch up, right? Because you can't make up for 100-something years in some cases of underfunding in a cycle or two, right? And yes, you can ask for your famous and successful alumni and In the case of people like Puffy, semi-alumni, I mean, I think he spent 3 semesters at Howard, but he still sort of identifies to some extent. And heck, I'll take him, he's got money. But you take whoever those people are, and they're by themselves, even if they donated 20% of their income, wouldn't make up for it. It's going to take a massive infusion from both the state and federal government, essentially the 40 acres and a mule kind of situation, to make up for what hasn't happened over, in some cases, over a century, more than a century in many cases, of underfunding. So the problem is that, and this is why when people say, why don't HBCU teams really try to chase the Division II national championship or the FCS national championship? Because unfortunately, those things aren't a big payday. And I hate to put it that way. But the reason that HBCUs are so focused on this classic or that classic, right? The Orange Blossom Classic, the Bayou Classic, you know, all these other classics, because those are a big payday, right? A lot of sponsorships. There's a TV deal associated with some of those things, and gate receipts. You know, alumni and all these people come to these things, so that money is money they need. It's not extra money. It's not surplus. It's survival money. That's why they go and play Michigan State or Rutgers, whoever. They need that $350, $380 something, $400,000 check, because without those pay for play games, they might not be able to keep their program going. So when people say, why don't they focus on trying to win the FCS or the Division II national championship? Why are they so focused on? Because many years, the best HBCUs can't even play in those playoff games because they literally can't afford to. You're taking on travel costs to go to a game that doesn't pay enough. It's a losing proposition very often, literally, in terms of money. They can't afford it. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but they literally can't afford it. The ADs look at the balance sheet and they say, okay, we've spent 1.7 million so far this year. We've taken in, you know, 906,000. We're already 400 and something, you know, 500 and something thousand in the red. And now you want to pack up the team and go to North Dakota or wherever this particular playoff game is being played. And even if we win, we don't get very much, right? There's very little coming back to you. Or we can go across town and play Southern, right? Or whoever it is that in this classic, that's going to make us $500,000 or $750,000 with virtually no travel cost. And the hotels are being paid for by the sponsors, whether the sponsors is Hilton or whoever it is. They're putting up our players up for free, as opposed to us paying for our players to stay in the day sick, the wherever it is, whatever inn in Fargo or wherever it is, or you know, wherever it is, you know, Texas, wherever that particular playoff game is being played. You've got to pay travel costs, feed your players, all this stuff. So unless and until HBCUs get a massive infusion of cash, and that's what I'm hoping the celebrity coaches and all this stuff will hopefully lead to, they'll never be able to not be locked into a cycle of having to take those, you know, butt whippings for money that they often have to take, you know, and coupled with that, these postseason classic games will always take precedence over playing for a Division II national championship or playing for an FCS national championship. Fun fact, the first, it was still called 1AA, but the first, when they went to this, you know, division between Division I and what they call 1AA, which is now called FCS, the first championship team was Jake Gaither's Florida A&M, won the first 1AA national championship.
Oh, wow. This whole interview has been a deep education for me. Wow, I did not know that at all. I'll do, you know, obviously we've mentioned that they are unable to compete for FCS national championships, Division II national championships, so on and so forth. There's been a big push for programs like Jackson State and such to join the ranks of the FBS level. How far away are we from seeing that, and how ready are these programs to compete at that level?
I hate to pay money, but I mean, unless somebody drops, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. They'd have to upgrade all their facilities. They'd have to increase their travel expenses. Their recruiting budgets would have to go up by 300, 400%. It's expensive to run a football program, Brock. I don't know how else to put it. It's incredibly, even a small program is hundreds of thousands of dollars per year to support. Larger programs are millions and millions of dollars, but luckily the larger programs also usually have access to a lot of money, and they have big time boosters, right? I mean, T. Boone Pickens whips out his, at Oklahoma State, whips out his checkbook and writes checks for tens of millions of dollars. HBCUs tend not to have that. They tend not to have somebody, one, who is able to, forget willing, able to do that, right? And you add to that because they don't have the same level of visibility, there's less sense that this is going to pay off for you if you did invest in them that way, right? Because when they name the stadium, T. Boone Pickens Stadium, right? Every time there's a televised game there, they have to say T. Boone Pickens Stadium, right? Whenever, if you're, a billionaire and you decide to donate, whatever amount of money, millions and millions to your old school, I mean, it's great. You did that out of the goodness of your heart, but also you realize that's coming back to you in some way, shape, or form, besides just karma, right? Because they're going to name something big after you. It'll be such and such field or such and such, or, the facilities will be named for you or whatever. Something will be, and that means that your brand or your business, whatever, is now associated with the successful football team. And that's why big time boosters in some of these programs literally hire and fire coaches or have a lot to say about hiring and firing coaches. And you don't really have that to the same extent at HBCUs, though they do have boosters. They do have alumni who are involved and sometimes, maybe too involved, but they don't have the same sort of, I'll use once again, a military term, throw weight, right? It's a missile term, but they don't have that same, they're not moving money in the amount so much that you have to listen to them. You listen like, oh yeah, yes, okay, we'll take that under advisement. But if somebody just wrote you a $60 million check, you have to listen to them, right? And that's the difference. They don't have that at HBCUs. So it's sort of a pipe dream, quite frankly, Brock, unless somebody's going to write a massive check. I mean, massive check, because you're talking about increasing the size of your stadium. You're talking about increasing the facilities, the weight room, the recovery tubs, the more people on your training staff, getting a, Coach Saban has access to a private jet. You think the HBCU coaches have access to private jets? I mean, it's very different. It's a very different environment. They're usually getting in their own personal car and driving if they want to go on recruiting visits. It's entirely different from what Dabo, Sweeney, and these others go through. So unless somebody somewhere, either a private individual, the federal government says, we're going to take tens of millions of dollars and say, here, Jackson State, here, whoever it is you think should also make that jump. We're going to help you to get to the point where you do that. It's a pipe dream otherwise.
Wow, I had a feeling that it wouldn't be as easy as some of the people, maybe some of the bigger names had made it seem. However, take them 10, 20 years from now, with the amount of players that are headed to HBCUs, we could see a player like that who has used their football career or something like that, and to build up their wealth, contribute back to the schools. I do kind of want to talk about HBCU players right now. Obviously, the quickest way and the fastest way for them to generate generational wealth is to make it to the NFL.
Yep.
Out of the current HBCU prospect pool, is there any prospects that are catching your eye at the moment who could be the
next? There's several. I'll start first with the ones I think have a legitimate shot to get drafted. Joshua Williams and Jacoby Durant, both of whom were invited to the combine. That's the first really strong indicator, as was Ja'Tyre Carter. But that's the first indicator that you could say the NFL takes these guys seriously as prospects. Both performed very well at the combine. Jacoby Durant, ran sub 4.4, had a great workout. He's a guy that can play almost any position in the secondary. He can play in the slot. He's done it. He can play boundary corner. He can play field corner. He could play safety. He's a little on the small side, but he's tough. He could do it. There's nothing in the back half of the defense, nothing in the secondary he can't do. Smart, tough, fast, strong for his size. Joshua Williams is a bigger guy, right? Good size prospect. He's a safety. Well, he's played corner, but he's being projected to safety by a lot of people. I think that's probably what he'll end up doing. But he's a bigger bodied defensive back with good ball skills, physically strong, good hips, good feet, a little raw in certain parts of his game, but the talent is clearly there. I think he gets drafted somewhere in the 6th round or so. I mentioned Ja'Tyre Carter earlier. big, athletic, once again, raw. Some of his tape, you can see that he gets too far over his skis, right? He's sometimes a little too aggressive. He can be had by guys who have really good secondary move, good counter moves. If you have a good two-hand swipe or a really good spin move, you can give him trouble. Or that like ghost move. I mean, there's things that give him trouble because he's very aggressive. He's powerful. He's a good athlete, but you can definitely get him, like I said, too far out over his skis. But with work, he's a guy that can be an NFL starter. I'll hit you with one or two more. Akil Glass, the tremendous quarterback from Alabama A&M. Strong arm, smart, fairly developed. Once again, there's things you can still work on. Sometimes his decision making isn't always the best, but he's got good natural accuracy. Like I said, an above average arm. I think an NFL team, I can't guarantee he'll get drafted, but I think an NFL team late, maybe as late as the 7th round, rolls the dice on him, especially in a weaker quarterback class. He's a guy who could be developed over time. If I'm the Steelers and, I'm not completely sold on the quarterbacks I have, I'm going to roll the dice on him late and think maybe he can be developed. I'll hit you with, like I said, maybe one or two more. Here's a guy that I believe in more than most. I don't think he gets drafted, but I think he ends up making a team and being successful as a player. That's Shamar Bridges. And Shamar is from Fort Valley State. He's my favorite Fort Valley State receiver since Ricardo Lockett, who unfortunately had his career ended by a neck injury. But he was part of that very infamous play call on the last offensive play of the Seattle Seahawks, where he's part of that, what would have been that pick/rub play or whatever that many people are upset about because they think he should have run the ball with beast mode there. But Ricardo was the intended target in that play. So he's a big guy. Came in at 6'4" 3/8", about 207 pounds, runs in the mid to low 4.5s, big hands, long arms, can jump. I mean, he's a guy that hard to cover just because of his physical dimensions, sort of like Mike Williams. You see, you're a Chargers fan. Imagine if Mike Williams didn't get exposure to the weight room and nutrition program in a place like Clemson, right? And so he's about 15 pounds or so lighter than Mike, but very similar in a bunch of other ways. Urge you to check out his tape if you get a chance. Those are some of the guys that have the best chance. There's a couple other guys I think have a decent chance as well. I think Jermaine Martin, terrific running back from NC&T. Two things work against him. He didn't test off the charts well, though he tested well enough. He's a quick guy, fairly powerful. But what works against him, he's older. He's one of the guys that was a 6th-year player because of the COVID year. So there are some teams that don't like players who are over a certain age, so that'll push him down. And the running back thing probably means that he's a guy who's borderline draftable, but he's more likely an undrafted free agent. I can see him having a nice career. And another running back, Ezra Gray. Ezra is another guy I really like, and he's a classic 3rd down back. Quickness, hands, great moves in the open field. He can, as the old saying goes, stop on a dime and leave you 6 cents change. He is a guy with all the moves, man. And I bet he could really dance, right? I bet he's one of the guys that can really get down, because you watch him play, you think that guy is loose. His body is like body's made of jello. He can fake you out. So I think some team, probably as an undrafted free agent, rolls the dice on him, and I think they're very happy with what they end up with in terms of him. So those are some of the guys that there's other guys, but that's one of those that just sort of jumped out to me and some of my favorites.
Gotcha. And we will be talking about the more NFL draft prospects at a later time. Thank you so much for, informing me, educating me on state of Black football history, HBCU, so on and so forth. Before we go, I do want to transition to the NFL free agency. What an incredible time it has been, especially for my team, of course, the Chargers, and the AFC West in general.
You picked the right time, because the AFC West is going to be insane, and the Chargers might be one of the top 6 teams in the NFL and still might not win their division. It's crazy.
Yes, absolutely. Now, obviously, the Chargers, coming to last season, had a phenomenal offensive group led by the young stud Justin Herbert, but defensively, let's be real now, they were bottom 5 at the league, and that's putting it nicely. They've made a lot of investments, especially on the defensive line, to supplement Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Jackson, J.C. Jackson, the secondary, to go along with already Asante Samuel Jr., Michael Davis, Derwin James. There is some rumors, Tyrann Mathieu, obviously that's unconfirmed. We'll see what happens. But where I thought the Chargers were going to dominate, Raiders have come in strong. Chandler Jones just traded for Devontae Adams, right? The Chiefs are still the Chiefs. The Broncos, obviously Wilson. They also got Randy Gregory and such. They have one of the better secondaries with Justin Simmons in the NFL. Out of that division, who is currently winning and losing free agency?
And I'm not just sucking up to you. I believe this. I think that the Chargers, I think it's theirs to lose. I think the Chargers, I don't have to bring, I mean, you're a Chargers fan. You know how this is. The Chargers are another one of those franchises where if something can go wrong, it will. If somehow you could avoid this bizarre curse that seems to hang over the team. If no one ends up getting a punctured lung from an injection, if I mean, if you don't have to play a playoff game when it's minus 17 degrees, I mean, there's all kinds of things that tend to happen to your Chargers. But if assuming none of these bizarre things happen, I could see this team not only winning the division, but going on a nice run deep into the playoffs. This is a team that could legitimately be a Super Bowl team. If they survive essentially the gladiator school that is that conference, because my God, I mean, I think anybody would say 4 of the top 8 teams in all of football, and maybe even 4 of the top 6, but only 4 of the top 8 are all in the same place, are all going to be battling each other all year. I mean, the Broncos could be legitimately a 10-7 team, right? And at the bottom of the division, they could be a 10-7 team at the bottom of the division. As you said, the Chiefs are still the Chiefs. The Chiefs will find a way, though I think they've taken a step back. But I think the Chiefs will still win 12, 13 games, probably about 12 games. The Chargers could be a 13-14 win team. And watch out for the Raiders. Watch out for the Raiders. Watch out. I mean, you heard it here, man. If they make the playoffs, no, you don't want to see those guys. That's not fun. Max XX Crosby quietly is one of the best pass rushers in football. And now you've got Chandler Jones on the other side. That's problems. That's issues. That's not fun because you can't slide your line in both directions. You know what I mean? Like it means you're keeping your tight end to block. It means you're keeping your running back in. Like you're changing. It's changing your offensive scheme. It's changing your play calls because you've got to worry about that. Those are both menaces. Those are 2 guys that are pretty much average double-digit sacks in their careers. That's not what you want to deal with. So, yeah, this is going to be tough. I mean, it's going to take probably 13, 14 wins to, but your team is good enough to do it. I mean, that's the thing. If you're a San Diego Charger fan, one, you hope you can avoid weird stuff, but if there's no crazy injuries, no, plane crashes into the team bus or something like that. I mean, nothing, those wacky Charger things happen. The Chargers could be one of the best teams and should, frankly, be one of the best teams in the league.
Absolutely.
And once again, amazing free agency, as you said.
Yes. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, especially when you look at a team like Kansas City. Obviously, offensively, they just signed Juju Smith-Schuster. They still have Tyreek Hill, Kelsey, Mahomes, and such. They did lose Tre'Davious Ward to the Niners, though. Frank Clark hasn't been playing up to par in these past couple of years as expected with a kid from Seattle, so on and so forth. It's going to be a very interesting division.
I mean, Tyrann Mathieu is probably gone too. I mean, they've got some work to do.
Justin Reed, so I'm pretty sure it's a done.
Yeah, I mean, Justin Reed's a really good player too. Yeah, yes. Yeah. But so much of what Tyrann Mathieu did went beyond what he did physically. And we'll see if Justin Reed can fill that leadership for it. Because Tyrann Mathieu was one of those voices that everybody listened. When he spoke, everyone listened. And like I said, we'll find out if Justin Reed's that kind of guy. He's never been asked to be quite that kind of alpha dog before, so we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that Tyrann Mathieu was so good at, obviously, was communication and the mental aspect of the game. Also covering Daniel Sorensen's behind, but that's another story.
Right? Ball. I like.
Thank you. And one of the things that I've seen with Miles Jack, obviously he's on the Steelers now, but when he was made to be a signal caller in Jacksonville, he suffered a little bit. Will that be what happens in Kansas City? Who knows? I do want to switch to Jacksonville because as a Chargers fan, when Mike Williams got re-signed to his 3-year, $60 million deal, so on and so forth, everyone was looking at that deal, was like, yeah, it's kind of good, better than playing on the tag when it comes to cap, so on and so forth. The next day, Christian Kirk completely resets the wide receiver market. Can you talk about not only what contract has done to wide receiver markets, what that has done to non-quarterback markets in general.
Yeah. That deal is not something I saw coming. I thought he would get a nice little payday in free agency. I didn't think it would be that. I didn't think he would be the guy that everybody was talking about in terms of his contract. I didn't think his contract would be the contract that would be discussed that day. Fascinating. They clearly value him differently from everyone else in the NFL, I guess is what I would say. My understanding is that no other deal was close to theirs. I mean, apparently they exceeded all the deals by a significant margin, is what I've been given to understand. So they were bidding essentially against themselves, which is, I mean, there's a whole meme, bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see how that works for them. It's a strange. I mean, he's a guy who's been productive and been good, but he's never been the guy before, right? He's always been Robin. He's never been Batman, right? It'll be interesting to see how that works out, because I'm assuming they want him to be Batman. I mean, if you're handing somebody that amount of money, my assumption is that he's going to be your primary wide receiver. If not, if he's a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, I'm not sure what to say. I mean, what are we doing then? But my assumption is they see him as a wide receiver 1. He's going to now have to be a guy that is working the entire field. He'll still be in the slot a great deal, but I'm assuming they're going to move him around. I mean, once again, if you're going to pay somebody that much money, I'm assuming you're asking him to do some of everything, play some X, line up at Y, as well as as well as at Z. So flanker split in and slot. You're going to ask him, maybe even be in the backfield at certain times. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you got to do a lot to get your return on that investment if you're going to pay a guy like. And I'm a Christian Kirk guy. But if you're going to pay him that amount, you better have a really good plan, a really good idea for what you're going to do with him. Like a miniature Deebo Samuels kind of thing, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know what they were thinking. I'll be honest with you, bro.
I think Trent Baalke he is who he is.
He's different. He's different.
I'm trying to find, I can attest this because he signed Rayshon Jenkins the previous season to a 4-year, $32 million deal, I believe. And, as a guy who's a Chargers fan, I watched Jenkins play.
Yeah,
he's middle of the pack. He's all right.
He's all right. Yeah, he's not embarrassing, but he's
an Anthony Lynn guy. He's not $32 million contract kind of guy.
Right. No, he's not $32 million contract. No, you're right.
It's gonna be interesting to see that.
He's not Brandon Scherf, right? He's not. Yeah.
No, exactly. And it's gonna be interesting to see with a team like Jacksonville, right, where you have Laviska Shenault still on the team. They just signed Zay Jones. You have, though he's more of a special teamer, Jamal Agnew, who can put in a bunch of different positions. We'll see what they do with Tavon Austin, even though obviously he's not one. He never really excelled in the NFL for a variety of reasons, like he did at West Virginia. But he's still, around there. Dan Arnold at the tight end position. So
it's a team filled with interesting pieces, but almost all the guys you're mentioning are guys who on a really good team are a number 2.
Yes.
I think it's fascinating. And Arnold's a really good number 2 tight end. Christian Kirk has thus far been a really good number 2 wide receiver. Every guy you name was a guy that on a really good team is probably a number 2. That's a very strange way to build a team, but we'll see. Once again, as we said before, the bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see how it works out for them. We'll see if they go 11-6, then I'll stand corrected. I'll say, okay, I was wrong and they were right.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to bring up about that is obviously Kirk is a career number 2 at Arizona, but the number 1 was also arguably the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL in DeAndre Hopkins. So with the fact that Kirk has reset the market in such a way, we're seeing guys like AJ Brown come up, DK Metcalf, so on, Deebo Samuel. Do you see their contract being at the level of, let's say, the top defensive pass rushers, or I guess edge rushers in the NFL? Do you see their contracts being a little lower, or do you see there being a difference between a wide receiver and more of a utility man like Deebo Samuel versus a guy like AJ Brown or such?
Yeah, that's a great question. Deebo is going to be an interesting test case. Remember when Jimmy Graham tried to claim he was a wide receiver, right?
Yes, trying to get that extra franchise tag.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe Deebo tries to define himself as something different from being merely a running back or merely a wide receiver. He's something more, right? Something who's somehow above, or I don't know. We'll see. I don't know what his strategy will be when his time comes to negotiate a contract. obviously with the market, as you just said, being aggressively reset, all these guys are like, right? And we just saw what Devontae got, right? So we're seeing where this is headed, because Devontae is, I mean, the other guy is kind of in that fight, right? Where he was mentioned, Nuke Hopkins. The other guy who has a really good claim to that throne to be the best wide receiver in football is Devontae Adams. So those guys are going to undoubtedly reset the market too. I mean, they should, and they should. Like, they're good enough. If you were going to spend a enormous boatload of cash on a receiver, it should be a guy like Nuke Hopkins, or should be a guy like Devontae Adams. And some of these younger guys who will be coming up soon, and Justin Jefferson someday will be one of those guys we'll talk about as well. As so yes, we should be seeing some big numbers. Maybe not pass rusher numbers quite, but higher than normal what we're thinking of for receiver numbers. Yes, I mean, I think pass rusher, top left tackle, and quarterback will always be tier 1, tier 2, that'll be the top 3 tiers forever in football, unless football changes in ways I don't foresee. It'll always be those. It'll be quarterbacks, pass rushers, top tier, your top tier left tackles. And then wide receiver has a chance to be the next thing. They have a chance. What should restore fiscal sanity, or whatever term you want to use, is the number of really good wide receivers that are available in the draft. This is a very deep wide receiver class. And so if a guy says, I want quarterback money, unless you just really love the guy, you may have to say, it's been great. We want to make sure you go to a place that you want to go. Give us a list of teams where you think you might want to play, right? I mean, because some teams, either because of their cap situation, right? Michael Thomas is going to be an interesting test case, but either because of their cap situation, or because they don't value receivers the same way that some teams do, are going to suddenly move on from those guys when they make those kind of salary demands, and they'll say, we're going to go in the draft, or we'll bring in a lower price free agent. There are some teams that do value receivers and value them to the point where they will be willing to pay them whatever it takes if they're a top receiver. So you'll find that out, right? That's how you find out how teams value you. When you see the contracts, oh, okay, they didn't like that guy as much as I thought, but they offered him, 20% less than what Devontae got, or 25% less than what Nuke got, or 15% less than what Justin Jefferson got, or whatever it is, whoever the person who resets the market next. When you'll know what they think when you say what they offer. Sadly, when people say respect, they mean money. When they say money, they mean respect. I mean, that's what the NFL is, Brock. When someone says, I just want to be respected, they mean, that's what they mean when they say, I just want to be respected. It was about respect. That's what that means.
Yeah. And you brought up a very good point about replacing through the draft. I mean, this next coming draft, there's between 6 and 7 receivers that receive first round grades. I'm just going to name off the top of my head. Right? Olave, Wilson, London, Pickens from Georgia, you had Burks from Arkansas, Williams from Alabama, and those are just the first round guys, right? I'm sure I'm missing a name or two. But then you guys got day 2, day 3 guys where like Khalil Shakir is a guy I've been big on for a long time.
I'm a huge Khalil Shakir guy. That's something I liked about you, Brock.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Hawaii fan because that's where I was born and raised. So I've been following Mountain West football for a long time. Love Khalil Shakir, but he's not the only one out of the Mountain West. A lot of love for Romeo Dubs as well. There's also a lot of love for a guy like John Mechie from Alabama, right? You got Tompkins from Utah State, who's going to be more of a day 3 kind of player.
Yep.
My question leading from that is, let's say that does go down the NFL, how you say it, where teams are more willing to move on from wide receivers.
Some teams will, yeah.
Some teams will. Having a bigger wide receiver market combined with a bigger NFL market saturate that and lower the contracts, in your opinion?
Well, for some guys. I mean, the guys that'll get hurt by the depth aren't Devontae Adams. Like, the guys who are the best of the best they'll get their money. Like, nobody's going to try to lowball the best receivers in football, right? Nobody's going to say, with a straight face to Nuke Hopkins, hey, this is a great wide receiver class. He'll be like, yeah, it is. Give me my money. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right? I mean, like, you can't do that with the guys that are at the top. The guys that are going to get hurt are the guys in the middle, right? The guys that are wide receiver 2-3s. If you're a guy like DJ Chark, it may work against you. Or if you're a guy like Isaiah McKenzie, right? It's guys that are seen as the complementary receivers. Those guys are the ones that may see a little less interest in them or a little less money or whatever based on the fact that we think we can replace you in the draft, right? We don't really, for the most part, we don't know for sure we can replace the top receivers.
Of course.
Right. These guys are good. We like them. It's a deep class, but are you sure this guy is really going to be Devontae? Are you sure this guy's really going to be Nuke, right? Is this guy going to be a Julio Jones level player when we get him? AJ Brown, right? Some of these guys will, but are you willing to roll the dice to that point? But yes, if you're a guy who's seen a tier below those guys, if you're seen as a notch below, right, then yes, that's going to hurt you in negotiations. Yes, they're not going to be as willing to pay you for you because you're seen as a more replaceable player. If you're a 2 or a 3 or especially a wide receiver 4, we are very confident unless we know we're bad at drafting receivers. And a couple of teams do know they're bad at it. Looking at you, Patriots. But but except for the teams that know that they do not do well at drafting receivers, most teams will call your bluff if you're a wide receiver 2, 3, 4 who wants to get paid.
Yeah, and kind of jumping off of that, obviously the 2, 3, 4 guys, they're not gonna get that top money. The Christian Kirk deal, that's an anomaly than anything. Of course, the Nuke and Adams, they're gonna get their top money. What about guys that are in the middle, where they are wide receiver number 1s, would be excellent wide receiver number 2s? I don't mean to disrespect anybody in the NFL, but a guy like, let's just say, Brandon Cooks or so on and so forth. Yeah. How do you feel about them when it comes to their money? And will they still get paid the same amount? Will it get reduced, or what are you thinking?
That's a really good question. And once again, there are teams that value different players different ways. But if you're a guy like Brandon Cooks, if you're a guy like, well, I guess we're going to see who the number 1 is in Indianapolis. My guess is eventually it becomes young Michael
Pittman.
Patterson.
Pittman.
Yeah, I think he eventually emerges as the number 1 there. But some of these guys will still get their money and some of them will not. And that'll depend on, I think, 2 main factors. One, does the offense lean on receivers, right? Is it an offense that really needs the receivers to be able to consistently work themselves open, beating man-to-man, or do you scheme guys open, right? There are some teams, the 49ers are great at it, and the Rams are pretty good at it too, where you don't have to be the world's best. They can scheme you open. They will force the defense, right, to make an opening where you can go. And that's one thing. And the other thing is age, right? If you're out there beasting and you're 23, 24, 25, looking at you, Justin Jefferson, you're going to get your money. Like, once again, you don't have to worry. Like you're going to be fine. If you are Brandon Cooks, who I think is 29, don't quote me on that. But I know he's not 30, he'll be 30 soon. You are a little less likely to get that second big payday if it's seen as a great class of wide receivers where they can put, okay, we like you, but we think Calvin Austin might kind of be you too, right? And we can get him cheaper. We might get him in the 4th round, right? So because of the depth of the wide receiver class, it's going to push some of the wide receivers down a little bit. So some of the people we think are locked 1st rounders might actually be 2nd rounders, just because of the depth of the wide receiver class. Somebody might look at some of these guys, might look at a DJ Chark and say, I think Christian Watson could be you, and I can get him cheaper, right? So yeah, for those guys, yes, it might hurt them a little bit. If you're an older and you've had injury stuff, like, a guy like Fuller, right? A guy who, you pencil in to miss 3 or 4 games every year anyway. And someone's saying, I could pay you this money, or I could draft this guy who doesn't have an injury history and he's cheaper. You're either going to have to play ball in terms of negotiations, or you're going to have to widen your scope in terms of places where you might be playing football. So those are the guys I think will be really effective.
Gotcha. And I don't mean to disrespect Mr. Fuller at all, but when I see a player
he's a good player.
He's a good player, but I don't feel, one, obviously the injury issues, 2, his ability to run the entire route tree is very limited. And then you see a guy like, for example, just Deshaun Jackson, who's 34, I believe. He's still able to have that lightning speed. I think for the wide receiver class, you're going to have to produce a lot more in your abilities in order to, like you said, get that second contract. I want to switch to the utility player. A guy I was high on last year was Amon-Ra St. Brown. I couldn't believe he fell to the fourth. I thought he was a second to third at most. He has emerged as a complete utility player and a phenomenal receiver. When it comes to the market like him, I was kind of just going to go back to, is there any clarity of where he might fall, or is he literally going to be, him and Debo, going to be kind of like the mark for everyone else? Obviously, Cordell Patterson is that guy.
Cordell Patterson doing kind of the reverse, yeah.
Yeah, he's older in his career, so when he gets a second contract, he's going to be in his mid to late 20s, where he's at the prime of his career. Do you have any idea what that number could be at, or any thoughts?
Well, this is first of all, great question once again. That's a good question. So here's what I think will happen. It'll be very dependent upon the situation. The 49ers cannot afford to play hardball. They know that their offense runs through Debo. Now, that may change a little bit if, we'll see what happens, obviously, with their, potentially great young quarterback. We'll find out how good he is. But with his emergence, they may become a little less Debo-centric. Eventually, I think there's at least one more year where Debo, is going to get crazy touches, and they try to bring it down the next year after. But that's going to be one thing. If a guy has the ball in his hands that much, you've got to pay him. I don't know how else to put it. It's difficult. It's not impossible. It's only difficult to replace what he does when a guy has the ball in his hands that much. So he's getting his money. As you mentioned, Cordell's older, and all the things sort of around him. He already said that he's not really about the money at this point. He wants to finish his career at this place where they love him and he loves them. He loves playing in Atlanta. He's happy.
That was a match made in heaven.
Right. He really likes it there. They really like him. And so he's willing to play for less than the market will bear, quite frankly. So he's never going to break the bank, and I don't think he really cares about it. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown, as you mentioned, a fourth rounder, when his deal comes up, next time comes around, two things. Where is Detroit as a franchise at that point? Are they a contender or on the verge of being a contender? That helps him in negotiations, because he will have been a big part of helping that team get there. If the team is still sort of tripping over its own feet and stepping into open manhole covers and that kind of thing, we can be bad for cheap. You know what I'm saying? There's a little less incentive to pay up on players if your team is not good. And you're thinking you might have to fire everyone and reboot anyway, which has been like an every 3-year kind of thing for them anyway. I mean, that's I know you're not super old, but they've been doing this for a while. They haven't been a consistent playoff team since Barry Sanders in his prime. And even then they were just getting there. So it's been a long time since they've been a consistently good franchise, a very long time since they've been a consistently good franchise. So my feeling is that it's very dependent upon what's going on. If this is a contender, if they're a team that, say, the year before his deal comes up, and they have to decide, well, first of all, they can just exercise his option. But when his deal comes up, and they're hopefully going to extend it. Let's say they want to extend him. He's had, the kind of success that people were projecting he might have. He's had a really good career to that point, the first few years. He's going to get something probably less than Debo, right? Just because, once again, that team is consistently a contender, and their offense is so Debo-centric. But the things that help him is that is a team that should have cap space based on what I'm projecting. They might get super active in free agency, that might change, but they should have a lot of cap space. And I think they want to keep a lot of their homegrown guys. It seems to be, I'm looking at Brad Holmes, and obviously he came there from the Rams. He was a big part of building that Rams franchise. And though people focus on the high price free agents, that team, in terms of numbers of draft picks and between you add undrafted and drafted players together, have the highest percentage of undrafted and drafted players on their team of any team in the NFL. People forget that, right? Everyone wants to focus on their splashy free agent moves, but that team is built on the middle rounds of the draft and undrafted free agents. So if they're able to have that kind of success, Brad Holmes carries over that magic that he had in Los Angeles. This team should be a contender in the next couple of years, and that strengthens the hand of Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I think he gets a little less than a guy like Debo gets, but I think he gets a solid contract. You mentioned, $32 million. He could be a guy that makes over that, right? He could be over that $32 million mark on that contract extension that he hopefully will receive. He could be somewhere in the, even up to the low to mid 40s, maybe. And once again, that depends upon other things. I mean, is he is he playing at an all pro level? I mean, he isn't there yet, but could he get there? I think he could. And if he does, that strengthens his, his bargaining.
So let's switch to another position because I think we've dissected the wide receiver utility man market enough. So this is a position that affects me greatly in the next 4 to 5 years because he will be up for an extension, and that'll be after Herbert signs his, which will be Rashawn Slater at the left tackle position, right? So Rashawn Slater, first year in the NFL, Pro Bowl. Orlando Brown Jr., he's due for an extension soon in Kansas City. Bakhtiari's gotten a huge extension. Trent Williams reset the market with his 6-year, $130 million deal. Where do we see the left tackle market going as we continue on this journey?
It's going to go up. I mean, it might be the second most important position if your team is built. If your team is a passing offense, it may be the second most important of all your offensive positions, especially if your quarterback is a traditional drop back passer. If your quarterback is one of those guys who can make people miss and extend plays, it's a little less important. But we saw him with Mahomes, who's, has a great sort of proprioceptive sense, can feel the rush really well, moves well. It wasn't enough. I mean,
yes,
comes a point where you have to protect. You can't always say our quarterback's gonna make two guys miss in the pocket and get off a rocket. Like, that's a lot to ask a guy to do consistently. So yes, that Bakhtiari money, that and up. Or Trent Williams. But Bakhtiari might not get quite that much because he's an older guy, and he's probably towards the end of his.
I think he just signed his last season week before he got hurt, right? So
Right. He did. He signed it before he got hurt. So, and that was probably his last big contract. But almost certain his last.
Yeah, him and Roddy Staley too. Timing was everything.
Right. Staley, right. Same deal with him. Got hurt almost right after. But he's a younger guy, so he'll probably get another shot at another big deal. But your guy Slater could definitely be a guy that helps reset the market when his time comes. So Trent Williams money only with a little extra something, a little extra spice sprinkled on it. So yeah, he's going to make a lot of money. And once again, I'm projecting outward. If he continues to play at a super high level, and I think he will, he doesn't get hurt, doesn't suddenly start to not be good, which I don't think is going to happen. But assuming he continues to be an excellent player, which I see coming, and continues to do that at his level, at the level that he's playing, only up more. He continues to get better, which he should. That guy has a chance to, he might be eventually the highest paid left tackle in the game. He has a chance at least at that. So yes, he could be in. He could as a tackle, as an offensive, ever sign a $150 million contract yet?
I believe Williams 130 is the most.
Williams is the king so far. He has a chance to end up north of that number. He could maybe be the first $150 million guy.
Gotcha. And just for a personal note, a lot of people, Chargers fans in particular, call Dean Spanos cheap. It wouldn't be surprised for me to see Rashawn Slater reset the market, as the Chargers are already given Joey Bosa, Eric Weddle many years ago, and currently Corey Linsley the highest paid contracts in their position. So it will be interesting to see. We've had a great discussion. I want to finish off with the negative, which is, who, in your opinion, or what teams do you think have had either poor free agencies or has lost free agency up to this point?
Well, I mean, it's still early enough that it's hard to really say lost, but I'll talk about teams that I think have a lot more work. I'll put it this way. They have a lot more work left to do. The Patriots are very well known for waiting until, the blue light specials, right? Scratch and dent time. And they'll probably do the same thing again this year. They'll wait until people have been kind of picked over and, guys are realizing they're not going to get the contract they thought they were going to get. They have holes to fill on that team on both sides of the ball. And, we sort of joked about their inability to find wide receivers in the draft. And when you are not able to successfully draft receivers consistently, and they have not been consistently able to find number one receivers, I'll put it that way, in the draft, that means you're now turning to free agency. Now, I mean, Julian Edelman, I guess, is sort of their great success, I guess, amongst, and even he was an undrafted free agent. So that's their great success, amongst homegrown receivers. most of the other guys who've been successful have come from other means. You have to go back to like the Deion Branch, David Patton and Troy Brown days to find homegrown receivers that were really, really, had really solid careers there. So that having been said, I could see them, let's say there's a couple of decent, probably older, or maybe a couple of younger free agents who are still available late in free agency. I can see them making a move on those guys. They still need to shore up both offensive and defensive lines. Like everybody that use pass rush. Obviously, they could use help in the secondary too. They're going to draft. I think both a corner and a safety. McCourty is still there, but how much longer can he keep playing?
He's 34. They can't be that.
Right. I mean, it's at some point they have to find his replacement. J.C. Jackson, obviously, has moved on. They've got some work to do. I'll put it that way. I won't call anybody a loser yet because free agency isn't over. But I'll say they've got some work to do, and they'll probably get active later in free agency. I'll go to my team, the Steelers. Though they've done some work in free agency, there's a lot more wood to be chopped. I'm not satisfied with the state of either their offensive or defensive line either. I still think they need help in the secondary, and I would like to see at least a complimentary receiver. I think they're going to draft a receiver as well. And a lot of people talked about the quarterback market. I know this team well enough to know that they weren't going after one of the top tier guys. Trubisky is exactly their kind of flavor. And he'll compete with, Rudolph, and he'll compete with Haskins, and they'll let the best man win. I think it'll be a true quarterback competition. I think they're hoping Trubisky wins it, at least in part because he's the one who's getting paid the most. You would always like the guy you're paying the most to be the guy who's on the field, not on the bench. But, he's not getting paid that much more than Rudolph. But the point is that they should, in my opinion, they should still be a little more active in free agency. Who else could really kick it up a notch? Arizona.
Yes.
Here we go. Yes.
I was going to mention them as off, but I just want to make these two kind of commentary points to see what you said. But yeah. I agree with you 100% on the Patriots, especially when you look at the last offseason. They spent a whole lot of money in a span of 2 or 3 days. I think obviously when they lost Shaq Mason and so on and so forth, they're going to go back to the original Patriot way roots. And
right, because last year we were like, what are they doing? Remember that? Like,
I know I got 5-6 alerts
active day one.
Yeah, what is this?
Somebody reran the picture from the draft of Nike, the Akita, saying that Nike, the Akita, had once again hacked into Belichick's computer, and that's what had happened last year, and that's why they're more active in free agency. Nike had taken over. I could not confirm nor deny if Nike had somehow gotten Bill's password, but yeah, that was a very different looking year for them. And then I guess either Bill changed his password, or maybe Nike's been disciplined. But yeah, we should spend some time in Arizona. Arizona was a team that a lot of people going into last season was their like sort of sexy dark horse Super Bowl pick, right? A lot of people like sort of said, writing articles about why Arizona could be a Super Bowl winner and all that kind of stuff. And then things went south for them fast, Brock. It went from being a team that a lot of people thought like, yeah, they could win it all, to a team that they might not even be super high in their division this year. I mean, this could go bad fast. Apparently there's been a rift between, the coaching staff and their star quarterback, and, obviously Chandler Jones is gone. There's some work to be done. Yes, that's the phrase I've been sticking with. There's some work to be done. And the first thing is to mend fences with your star quarterback. I mean, yes. It won't matter what else happens in free agency if they have a very unhappy quarterback who's looking to push his way out of there. That's not good. That's not what you want. I mean, a star quarterback on his rookie deal is heaven to a front office. That's what you want. You want to have Justin Herbert, right? You want to have, that's the whole thing. We want to have Lamar. You want to have Kyler. That's what you want. That's why you do all that work, to find this young star quarterback and say, we've got X number of years. We can do this, and this. And then by the time his deal comes up, hopefully we won a Super Bowl or two, but 2, we've already started to build into our plan how we're going to get capital. But all that goes under, goes down the toilet in essence, if you don't figure out how to keep your rookie deal star quarterback, one, on your team, and two, happy. So that's their first order of business. And then, yes, they got holes to plug. Multiple places on the defense and a couple places even on offense. I mean, Christian Kirk, I think they can sort of survive that. Rondell Moore, I think, can do everything that Christian Kirk did and maybe even give you a little extra oomph because
he's very shifty in open space.
He's very tough and explosive.
Yes.
I love this kid. And if you're a dynasty person and you took Rondell Moore and you were just patient, your patience, I think, will be rewarded this year. If you're a person who plays dynasty fantasy, Rondell Moore, with Kirk moving on, if somebody is offering you crazy, crazy stuff, you may want to consider taking the deal for a trade, but you may want to hold their feet to the fire, and because they're recognizing what you're recognizing. He's probably about to have a huge breakout.
Yes. So I want to go back to the Steelers real quick and then I'll jump into Arizona. What I'm not sure is inside the Steelers organization is Colbert's hands being tied because he is retiring after the draft. They're leaving some cap space for the next GM. I'm not sure about that. The Trubisky signing I felt was a good fit, but what I think people are not talking about is the Miles Jack signing, especially, right? Like I believe Schobert is still on the team, who was his teammate down in Jacksonville. Schobert is more the defensive caller, right?
Yep.
We'll see what happens with Bush. I mean, he hasn't really been able to come back from his injury as well. But Miles Jack is going to be able to just play without having to, take that mental game that has struggled him a little bit. So I think that's a great move for the Steelers. Looking to see more maybe next offseason for them to spend the cash a little bit more, especially after they finalize Fitzpatrick's extension. Moving to Arizona, right? You've made a very, very excellent point. I want to propose this out to you. I want to get your thoughts on this. I like Kyler Murray a lot. I've liked him since his senior year from Oklahoma. I do recognize there's three big issues with him. He gets hurt way too often in the late season. Secondly, he hasn't performed enough, in my opinion, to be demanding a contract extension at this point in his career. Right? And three, with an offense like the air raid in the NFL, I'm not saying Murray is replaceable. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that if he is refusing to play, I think the Cardinals should move on from him sooner than later. What do you think about that statement?
Well, just seen some odd things happen in terms of star quarterbacks in the early part of their prime suddenly becoming available, which almost never happens. If it happens with him too, I mean, my gosh, this will be the most I've seen it happen. Guys in their, early and mid 20s who have superstar ability becoming available. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. It's such a weird thing because I think if he played at least one more season, the team would have come to him and said, hey, let's talk about long-term. For whatever reason, he decided maybe, once again, you hear things, whatever. My understanding is that things got heated during like the exit interviews at the end of the season. A lot of, well, why didn't you do such and such? Those play calls weren't such and such. Well, why didn't you know such and such? That wasn't the play we called anyway. Why were you doing, some of that? There was some of that, some of this, some of, guys talking at each other and yelling maybe a little bit at each other as well. So you add that together, which I think played into it. I think there was frustration involved on both sides. I think Kyler feels like the rookie deal is unfair to some extent, and he's probably not 100% wrong. I mean, you're playing below market value on your rookie deal. That's a factual statement. When the NFL put in the salary structure, right, on those guys, so that there's no more Sam Bradfords, no more,
DeMarcus Russells,
right, and Cams, and right, those are gone. Getting those kinds of contracts, that's gone. Being the highest paid player in the league as a rookie quarterback, gone. They got rid of that. They said no more of that. And so that's why it became such an imperative to try to be a team that is, starting your young quarterback on his rookie deal, because it opens up so many avenues where you do other things with your money. But getting back to Kyler's situation, moving on from him is easy to say, hard to do. Let me rephrase that. It's hard to do in terms of selling it to your team, selling it to yourself, selling it to your ownership, selling it to your, okay, so now what do we do? Now are we going back to draft a quarterback? Are we drafting a quarterback again, right? After we had built all these things around this one particular guy. Cliff Kingsbury is the coach there because they were going to draft Kyler. That's why. You know, I mean, there's
yes. He was at USC as an OC for a month and then somehow gets an NFL gig after being subpar at Texas Tech. That doesn't happen without Kyler Murray.
It's all about Kyler. So moving on from him is you would get a lot from whatever team you made the deal with. So you could conceivably retool because of that, but it's a tough sell because they were building everything around him, Brock. Their whole deal was going to be, Kyler world, basically. We're building in all this run stuff around what Kyler can do with his feet. We're building our passing game around Kyler's ability to freeze the defenders because they have to respect his ability to run. All those little pop passes to Zach Ertz, so that, whoever their tight end will be in the future, but Zach Ertz, at least in the immediate future, come because linebackers get sucked up having to make sure that they don't have a gap open for Kyler to go running through for 8 free yards whenever he feels like it, right? There's all these things that you can do that are Kyler-centric. And if all of a sudden, fill in the blank is your quarterback, whoever it is, would be plan B, it's not, say it's not the same is not saying enough. Like you almost have to blow it all up then and start over again. It's, like I said, easy to say, hard to do. The only good news, if you want to think of it as good news, is they would get an unbelievable haul for a guy with his everything that he brings to the table.
Yes.
We just saw what Deshaun got, and Deshaun is facing a fairly lengthy suspension, is older, and is not quite that level of athlete, though he's a little more accomplished than a guy like that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Then you take a look at a guy like Russell Wilson, who is, we could say he's in his prime, but I thought his prime expired maybe 2 seasons ago. But I know that's rude. I apologize.
Got a little bit of a mean streak, T. I like that too. I'm not quite ready to say his prime is ended, but he's in the latter part of his prime.
That's a fair point. I want to make this very clear. I don't think he's a scrub by any means. I do think he's still one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. I want to make that very clear. But a guy with his age, with the type of wear and tear on his body, especially being a mobile quarterback in the early parts of his career, you are able to get Noah Fant, who had a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit of a down year in Denver last season, but big, tall, strong, athletic tight end. You got 2 firsts, 2 seconds, I think a third, a fifth, or something like that for a guy of that value. I was going to put this hypothetical out there. Into next year's draft, I currently have CJ Stroud as my number 1 quarterback in the draft over Bryce Young. I do think Bryce Young will be a high pick. I'm not sold on him quite yet because there's some of the issues of his height, weight, and also how good was he, or was it the talent at Alabama? That's a big question.
The answer is both. I think he's really good, but it obviously helps to play with crazy off-the-charts ludicrous talent. Watch out for some of the, sort of like we saw with Burrow and to a slightly lesser extent with even Kenny Pickett. Watch out for some of the older cats who are maybe bounced around a little bit to have great bounce back here. Don't be shocked if Keaton Slovis has a tremendous year next year.
Oh yes, especially with that Kentucky offense. I know their offensive coordinator left. I think it went back to the Rams, but that offense that they have with Wendell Robinson and such, explosive. So
it's a terrific offense, and that kid Addison. Oh, that kid's terrific. I love Jordan Addison. So yeah, I could see Slovis having a huge year and pushing himself up. There's Max Johnson. We'll see what happens with him, but there's some of those sort of been around the block guys. Don't be shocked if one of them has like a Joe Burrow character arc or whatever, where they end up having an off the charts great, see some of these guys you're talking about, not that they're going to have a bad year, but I wouldn't be surprised if sometimes when a guy first comes out of the box, right, as a freshman or a redshirt freshman, whatever, no one's really seen him, and you have a lot of early success, especially if you're on a great team. Both of those guys are on great teams. I could see them having slightly down years next year and then bouncing back the year next. But, Bryce Young isn't draft eligible anyway, so I guess it's really sort of a moot point. He wouldn't be, right? He's a redshirt. He's right. He's a redshirt.
Right, and then Mac Jones.
You're right.
Yeah.
Stroud didn't redshirt though, right?
I think he was on the team for the COVID year, so 2020, then last year.
Oh, that's right, the COVID year. Yeah, you're right. You're right. The COVID year. So you're right. You're right. They both would be draft eligible. Yes, thank you. That's right. The COVID year. Right. That messed with me. Yes, right. The COVID year. Yes, thank you. You're right. So yes, they would be eligible. But I won't be surprised, like I said, if one of the older cats has one of those bounce back years and kind of pushes his way. people should be rightly nervous about guys that haven't played that much football. The success rate hasn't been that high for those guys that haven't. I mean, once again, we just talked about Mitchell Trubisky. Those guys that have only played, 12, well, more than 12, but we're talking about like in the low teens, mid-teens in terms of starts. Trubisky and Sanchez, right? 16 starts.
Yes.
It's a low number. And these guys will get more starts than that because they will have been 2-year starters. And playoffs on top of that, I guess, sort of helps. But some teams are fine with it. Some teams don't care. But some teams still would like to see a few more starts under your belt. But yeah, we'll see what happens with these guys. Absolutely. And of course, if indeed this quarterback class ends up producing very few starters, maybe only 1 or 2 starters, that will help those guys, right? Because there's more seats at the table. If it turns out that people maybe underrated some of the guys later in this class, if a guy like Carson Strong comes out and turns it into a starter, if a guy like Desmond Ridder turns into a starter, so now you've got all the guys who are in the league already, and then say 4 new starters instead of 2 new starters come out of this class. That also will have a little bit of an effect. I mean, people will always draft quarterbacks, especially if they're good. I mean, don't get me wrong. People are going to say, "Oh, I'm not taking a quarterback because," no, people will take quarterbacks, but there won't be as many who will go as early if this class is better than people think. And I think people may end up walking away later realizing that this quarterback class was a little better than they thought.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just going to list some names for the colleges, some guys to look out for. I am not saying that these guys are NFL starters or stars. These are just some of the guys that, they've played a long time and they are in new situations which could benefit them. Guys like JT Daniels, who I believe committed to LSU, Thompson, who went to Nebraska. A big name that I'm looking out for personally is Dylan Gabriel, who's now at Oklahoma, right? I mean, obviously, Jorge guys, I've seen it from Mililani, lit it up at UCF. He does have some intangible issues, in my opinion, but he's going to be the Levy, and also he's going to be surrounded with the most amount of talent he's ever had.
Yep.
That could happen. So let me throw this hypothetical for you, right?
Sure.
Obviously, Kyle stays on the team this year. Next year, let's say you can go out if you're Arizona, you can get Stroud, and you can get another first, a couple other day 2, day 3 picks, or another like normal role players, something like that, get a couple picks. Is that a deal you make? Because in my opinion, if this is the mindset Murray has, that's a deal I make.
It's a deal you make if you can't someone make it work with Murray. You want to make it work with Murray for so many reasons. A part of it is teams generally want their, especially when you've invested, not just monetarily, but like their team culture, like so much of what they do is built around him. So Stroud's a decent athlete, but he's not Kyler. He's not a guy that's going to do the Kyler things that they do with him. I'll throw out one other name. Sorry, I'm going to backtrack very quickly. Watch out for Hendon Hooker to
yes.
really continue to progress at Tennessee.
Well,
Turn
Heupel's
into a
offense.
first-round quarterback if he's on the track that he's on. I won't be surprised. But back to your actual question. It's a deal you only make if you have to, right? You would prefer to make it work with him for a bunch of reasons. And I think that they would like Stroud just fine, but I really think they prefer Murray. I think that some of the things they want to do are dependent upon his ability. I mean, he makes guys miss in open space in a way that, you have to go back to guys like Vic at the quarterback. I mean, he literally can do that. Like he can move, because Lamar Jackson is a very, very good football player and a tremendous athlete, but he doesn't quite have the same stop-start ability that a guy like Michael Vick had, partially because his lower body isn't as powerful as Michael Vick's. So it's just physics come into play. When you have a really strong lower body, you're able to come to that stop and then restart again because you have more musculature to do that, right? You're fighting physics, you're fighting, the force of inertia, and it needs strength to do that. He doesn't have as much strength. He has to kind of gear down a little bit to come to a complete stop because he can't just do that thing that Barry Sanders and Michael Vick could do because they had tremendously powerful lower bodies. And Kyler also, people say he's not that big, but you look at him from the waist down. He's a big dude from the waist down. He's got a whole lot of junk in that trunk.
Yes.
He's got thick thighs to save lives. I mean,
that's where all your power comes from, and he has a lot of it.
He has a lot of that, right? From hips to ankles, he's one of the biggest quarterbacks in the league from hips to ankles. If you're measuring in circumference and girth, he and guys like Russell Wilson are bigger, even though they're not 6'4", 6'5", than most of the other quarterbacks in the league. Way bigger than guys like Joe Burrow or Aaron Rodgers down here. But yeah, so CJ Stroud isn't that kind of guy. And he can move around a little bit, he can stem plays, but he's not about to force you to respect the run the same way. So they'd have to change a lot of what they do. And they might be willing to do that, but I don't think they want to. I think they prefer to run the offense that they've designed and went and hired this particular coach for the express purpose of doing that. So that's their preference. But yes, if truly it's a situation where they're being held hostage, then yes, they have to do what they have to do to survive as a franchise. But I mean, I guarantee you their huge preference is to somehow make it work with the guy they're building their franchise around.
Gotcha. And I do want to say this about Arizona. Obviously, last season, I thought they had one of the best off seasons in the NFL. Obviously, J.J. Watt was the marquee signing, but bringing A.J. Green, we didn't know where he was at, but he wouldn't be called upon to be a wide receiver number one anymore. I thought James Conner was an excellent addition, and
and the Conner was the best bargain of all of them was Conner. Yeah,
absolutely. I think he only got paid like 1 point something million for the season, and he scored a 10 something. Great offseason, right? Especially when you're moving on from a guy like Patrick Peterson, right? What are you going to do? Obviously, Isaiah Simmons is growing. Buda Baker is a certified star. Murphy Jr. is coming into himself. So it's going to be interesting to see if they do make some moves later on because, like you said, last year, a lot of people had high grade on them. J.J. Watt goes down, they lose to Green Bay. Everything just falls apart from that point. Before we go, I know we've been talking for a long time. That's one last team, right? I've been very critical from them since new ownership took over. Quite frankly, I disagree with every move they make except drafting probably Tommy Trouble, which is the Carolina Panthers. I would just like to go on record and saying that in my mock draft last year, I had the Panthers taking Justin Fields. Then when they I'll explain my decision in a second. But then when they traded for Donald, obviously Fields was off the table at that point for them. I had them taking Rashawn Slater because the left tackle position, once Okung left, was not up to par. Then if they were going to cornerback, my number one cornerback off the board was Surtain, not Horn. Obviously, they didn't do anything I said. They actually did the complete opposite. I like Justin Fields. I thought he was a Matt Rule quarterback. I also didn't like the hiring of Matt Rule. That's a long story for now and then. What do you think about their process so far and then heading into this offseason and further down the line?
Okay, so it's a fascinating situation. Sam Darnold is one of those guys, somebody else will fall in love with him too. Like some guys, Carson Wentz, they see this guy and he's, moves around fairly well. He's got a strong arm. He matches their mental picture of what they think an NFL quarterback looks like, right? And people can talk themselves into these guys. They'll talk themselves into these guys for years. He'll get another chance, right? Mark my words. You've not seen the last of Sam Bradford in the NFL. Not Sam Bradford. We have Sam Bradford. Sorry. Wrong Sam. Yes, we have seen the last of Sam Bradford.
Yes. Wrong person in the same situation.
Right, but it's the same deal, right? You keep talking yourself into this guy. This time it'll work, right? This time, for real. This time it'll work. So yes, right. But moving on from him. So they had Teddy, and Teddy was a guy that I think they brought in as a bridge, and then they went back to Cam. It was just they did some strange things there. They did some odd things. Moving forward, moving back, moving laterally. I mean, just all kinds of strange things. As a franchise, it looked for a while like they weren't sure what they wanted, right? So at some point, they've got to first say, here's what we are, right? Here's what we are as a franchise, what we are and what we aren't. They aren't a contender right now, right? When you aren't a contender, you've got two decisions to make. Are we close? We're not a contender, but are we close? Or are we not, right? We're so far from contending, right? We need to change everything. For some reason, I don't think that they're super far. I don't think they think that they need to reboot again. I think they think, I'm not saying I agree with them. I think they think they're a handful of players away from being right back in the mix. We'll find out very soon if they're right or wrong. They need some of everything at a bunch of different positions. Obviously, if Christian McCaffrey comes back and stays healthy, that helps them a tremendous amount because they run everything through him. He's their Deebo Samuels, right? He's their guy that will lead them probably in both receptions and touchdowns and yards from scrimmage and rushing and basically everything except passing. Hopefully he doesn't lead them in passing, but he's likely to lead them. That means it's all gone wrong, but all Wildcat all the time, or Wild Panther. But yes, hopefully not that. But he's going to lead them in pretty much every other offensive category, right? And they have some talented receiver. They haven't always figured out what to do with some of the talent they have at receiver, but they have some talented receiver. If they can straighten out their quarterback position, if they can, get back to being a dominant run team and then throw the ball and play action when they want to, right? They need not to need to throw the ball. They need to just want to throw the ball. If they are in a situation where they need to throw the ball, it's not the best situation for them. And they've got some good young pieces on defense. They do. They have some good young pieces on defense. They need to keep adding, but they have some good young pieces on defense. So if they can continue to build around the good young pieces they have on defense, if they can get at least consistency at quarterback, right? They don't need to necessarily have Aaron Rodgers or Pat Mahomes or Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr. They don't necessarily need to have that. Or Patrick Levon Mahomes II. But they do need to have functional. I mean, this might be where, and once again, this is one of those things, I don't want to keep passing around certain quarterbacks, but if Taylor Heineke ends up needing a new home, right? The Panthers could do a lot worse than Taylor Heineke, right? They could do a lot worse than Taylor Heineke. He's young, he's cheap, he's not going to kill your team. You know what I mean? Like he's good enough while you're doing other stuff on your team.
He's a game manager.
He's gonna keep you afloat.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, he's a guy that will. He can even get you into the playoffs, right? If your rest of your team is good, you can get to the playoffs with Taylor Heineke, and he's not going to break the bank. You have lots of cap space when you'll be active in free agency next year. You could still draft a young quarterback and develop him. Heineke's not the kind of guy that's going to, be a dog in the manger. He's not going to be a guy that's like not sharing and not working with the young quarterback. He knows who he is. He's self-aware. Guys like Case Keenum, guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick, guys like Taylor Heineke, they're very appreciative of the fact they're getting to play football, and they're willing to share their experience and their gifts with younger quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. And a guy I want to add to that name of the Heinekes and such is Gardner Minshew. I think
he's a better version of Taylor Heineke. Yeah.
Quite frankly, I think he'd be a perfect fit for a team like Carolina. He does have some mobility, which helps out, especially with the offensive line that they have now. It's not going to be game changing. It's going to be extend the play for a second or two that you need. But I want to go back to a point that you said earlier, which is I don't think Carolina sees reality because they have begun a rebuilding process while trying to compete, right? They go and trade Arnold for CJ Henderson. Okay, whatever. Then they go and get Stephon Gilmore. Okay, that was out of nowhere. And he's going to leave in 6 months anyway. Whatever, right? And then they go and get a guy like Darnold. And then they pick up his fifth-year option, which is going to guarantee them like 15 or something million. But then re-sign. I think I seen a meme one time where it was like the Panthers released Cam, then signed Teddy Bridgewater to replace Cam, then signed Darnold to replace Bridgewater, then signed Cam to replace Darnold. So they're paying Cam the replacement for Cam and the replacement for Cam's replacement, right? I think that sums up what the Panthers.
That's when you know you're doing it wrong.
Yes.
Right? If you're looking for a sign that you're doing it wrong, when you're paying the guy you're paying to replace the guy you decided to replace, and then you're paying the other guy to replace the guy that replaced the guy that replaced the guy, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, there's no other way to put it. And then obviously in the draft, they draft Horn, who wasn't even my best defender, nor was he my best corner. I mean, obviously that's just my perspective compared to them. But then you also go out and you have those defensive pieces, the Burns, and then you have Jeremy Chin and such. And then you do kind of acquire this young cornerback group. And then this Brown from Auburn, we'll see what happens with him. And then you just are unable to supplement it with, in my opinion, good coaching. Obviously, Joe Brady flamed out as offensive coordinator. I don't like Matt Rule at all. I know there's supposed to be a point to this, so I'm just gonna say this. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing, and I was hoping you could provide some clarity, which you have for the most part. But
I mean,
they're the best experts in the world.
So
they know what they're doing.
I'll say this very quickly. David Tepper is very rich, like most NFL owners. He's younger than most NFL owners. He's more aggressive, but not always sure how to express his aggressiveness. But he's a little more aggressive than some owners, and he wants to make a splash. He's being told by his football people that we should just be bad for a couple of years, but he can't quite buy into it for whatever reason. He wants to still, as you said, sort of compete, sign some players that he likes. I'll be interested to see what this season is going to be a really interesting season for them, because it'll either mean that they've come to accept and realize, oh, we're not who we thought we were, and we have to go in this direction, or maybe they'll prove us all wrong. They'll win 9-10 games and then have another, and next year have a great free agency and a good draft, and then be right there in the mix, for winning the division. Maybe they're on a 2-year plan to win the division. If so, I will admit that I was wrong.
I'll admit I was wrong too. I just want to add this point: they're not going to win the division. Brady's coming back, right? Matt Ryan is still the quarterback in Atlanta. I'm sure they're doing some things to mend the relationship with him after the whole Watson debacle, along with the fact that Arthur Smith, to me, is proving himself as a head coach, and AJ Terrell is becoming one of the best corners in the entire NFL, right? And then you look at a team like New Orleans. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with the quarterback. I think they're going to re-sign Winston, but the defense is on. Even with losing Marcus Williams, the defense is still elite unless Cam Jordan takes a complete nosedive this year. So we'll see about that. Bill, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun and education, to say the least. Do you have any final things you want to say to anybody listening out there?
Yeah, my final thoughts is that this is will be a watershed year, I believe, for a lot of Black assistant coaches. And I think if Todd Bowles continues to show that he deserves another chance, and Alonzo Pep Hamilton, who's done amazing work with your quarterback, with other quarterbacks. I mean, look, Andrew Luck, Justin Herbert, Davis Mills. I mean, the guy clearly knows how to develop young quarterbacks. Some team, I mean, no offense to what happened with Cliff Kingsbury, he's going to look at his career in the NFL and Cliff Kingsbury's career in the NFL and say, well, what could this guy who has this great run of success with young quarterbacks, what could he do with a whole team? I think Leslie Frazier hopefully is closing in on his next opportunity to be an NFL head coach. So this is going to be a watershed year. I think we might break the record, which sadly is not a hard record to break, but for new Black head coaches next year in the NFL. And I would love to see, Eugene Chung wrote a piece for, The Athletic, for somebody, about his struggles to try to move up the hierarchy as an Asian American head coach or as assistant coach, to get a chance to be a head coach. We have not, Norm Chow at some point should have had a chance to be an NFL head coach. There have been a few Asian American head coaches who, though they are small in number, obviously there's just a few at the top D1 level. Ken Niumatalolo, Robert Anai has been a terrific assistant coach who should be a head coach or get a chance to be a head coach at the big time D1 level at some point, after being a great, assistant coach at BYU and now at Virginia. I want to get to the point where we don't have to keep talking about the state of minority coaches, where there's so many of them and they're doing, all the things, failing, succeeding, whatever, being average, all that, to the point, but where it's regular, normal enough that we don't have to, I shouldn't be able to keep track in my head of all the minority coaches who are at the coordinator and head coach level and know all their names and their middle names, even in some cases. It shouldn't be that easy to keep track of. There should be too many of them for me to be able to do that. We haven't gotten to that point. My hope is maybe in the next year or two that we get to the point where I can no longer easily recollect the names of all of the Black offensive, defensive headquarters and head coaches, all of the Hispanic head coaches and D coordinators and offensive coordinators, and well, there are no Hispanic offensive coordinators at the moment, but it shouldn't be so easy. I shouldn't know that. Like I should have to think about it, right? It should take a little more effort. I want us to get to the point where we keep talking about how it's a meritocracy. People are like, oh, these coaches, all these owners care about is winning, and so they care about winning only. And well, you think the guys in the '60s didn't care about winning? I mean, no, everybody wants to win, but they want to win with the people with whom they're comfortable. And they haven't yet gotten, many of them haven't yet gotten comfortable with coaches that don't look like them, right? And hopefully that's changing. I hope the success of some more of these. We'll see what happens with the staff that Bruce Arians has built, which has multiple women coaches, right? First team to have more than one on staff at the same time. 2 Black coordinators. I mean, hopefully the success of Tampa Bay encourages people to realize, okay, we can widen the talent. So that's my final point.
Absolutely. I just want to jump off that point real quick by saying that one from the owner's perspective is the whole Darnold argument, right? You see a guy pocket passer, tall, Caucasian, USC Trojan, right? Oh, that's the Linar, that's the Palmer, so on and so forth. I agree with you that I do believe we're going to see more of like a renaissance or a revolution of minority head coaches.
I hope so.
Yeah, especially when you look at, I want to bring up 2 things. One, obviously this year, it was not even remotely close for African-American or just minority head coaches in general. I think 2 positive things have come out of this offseason when it comes to that statement. One, Eric Bieniemy is shown that he's not getting a head coaching job because of his own issues instead of the color of his skin. And 2, if we look at the playoffs and recent success, a lot of these teams do have minority coordinators. I do expect to see, let's take a look at just the championship games, for example. Obviously, the Bengals have an all-white staff, but they're with the Chiefs, they had Bieniemy as well as a coordinator. Then you look at there's Raheem Morris, the Marco Ryans. Then you got other guys that are looking to get jobs. Aaron Glenn, obviously you mentioned Frazier, Leftwich, Todd Bowles, so on. So
Leftwich should get a head coaching job soon too. Yeah,
it'd
be great if we can get like 4. That would be the record.
Yes,
4 new ones would be the record with some room to spare. In fact, but yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things we're going to see just from a coaching perspective is in the AFC West, you got 3 somewhat new head coaches. And obviously Staley, who's entering his 2nd season, Nathaniel Hackett, and also Josh McDaniels. 2 offensive, 1 defensive. If Staley is able to kind of dominate that division with his defensive philosophy, I think you are going to see your defensive guys, your Ryans, your Raheem Morris, your Fraziers, your Topo, so on and so forth, get those opportunities. And I hope to see a more diverse coaching staff. I've always believed diverse thinking leads to more creative thinking, which leads to more success in the field. And I cannot wait to see what happens next, especially with the revolution we've seen at the executive level with a lot more minority GMs last season and this season as well.
Agreed. Well, Brock, it has been a pleasure. I'll have to bring you on something I do someday.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Bill. Thank you so much to everyone that's listening, and we'll catch you guys next time. Bye. Thank you so much to Bill Carroll for coming on the show. You can check out his Twitter. It is located in the description below. If you'd like to support MST, you can do so by donating to our GoFundMe. You can also reach out for a potential sponsorship, and you can also help by just clicking that subscribe button, once again, located below. Thank you guys so much for listening. We can't wait to come back with more great content about all the sports that you love. And I personally just want to extend a huge thank you to everyone who has supported MST and my journey so far. All right, guys, till next time. Bye.